Cool. All right, let's begin. We are just right at 10 p.m. Perhaps, Rosie, would you like to? How would you like to be addressed? I don't know, Zeno or Rosie, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about DarkFi and who you are within the project. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So Rose or Rosie is fine. Zeno is just a random nim that I choose sometimes. So happy to give an introduction to myself and to DarkFi. So I'm guessing your audience is like somewhat familiar with DarkFi, but if not, I'll give a short intro. So DarkFi is a new L1 blockchain with a privacy focus. It's kind of like the analogy we draw is the way that Ethereum is the kind of uh, programmable version of Bitcoin. DarkFi is the programmable version of Monero. So we're drawing on the new technologies that have become available in the past 10 years since Monero was launched and making a very featureful kind of app chain where you can deploy anonymous applications. But we're different to, I made the Ethereum analogy. So we're kind of like the privacy version of Ethereum. But we're also very different to Ethereum in the sense that we have a stronger product focus. So we are shipping DarkFi with a core product offering as well. And what that looks like at the moment is basically a decentralized peer-to-peer Telegram, but fully anonymous. Where so it's a chat app, and then on the chat app you also get to use the smart contracts that DarkFi offers, so you can send payments, you can participate in a DAO. So that's the brief introduction to DarkFi, and I've been working on that for a number of years. I'm a programmer and a writer as well. If your audience are familiar with Lunarpunk, I came up with that as a term to basically reignite the emphasis on privacy in crypto, which at the time I put out an article in 2021. It was the whole kind of crypto space was much more talking about transparency, about DeFi, about on-chain coordination. But there's very little discussion on privacy at that time. So Lunarpunk was invented as a way to critique that and to argue that without anonymity, these systems that we're creating, this new world of permissionless on-chain applications, is actually vulnerable to censorship. So we really need privacy and anonymity to reach that level of anti-fragility that we want to see. So that's a quick introduction.
Cool. That's pretty
So,
good. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, I have a few. Yeah, so thank you, Rosie. It sounds fantastic. Um, yeah, I did have a. This is Yenichar with Pivex, and I was wondering, as part of this, do you have a coin? I mean, is there a coin associated with the DarkFi blockchain?
Um, yeah, there will be a coin.
Okay.
We're a proof of work chain. So there will be like a coin
Okay.
that you can mine, but we haven't announced the specific tokenomics for that. They're still basically actively being developed. So, but we hope 2025 is like a target for us in terms of like putting out the tokenomics and getting community input, and yeah, we're hoping to move forward with that fast.
I see. So your plan, that sounds great. Your plan is you'll have a coin, and that coin will be used to secure the DarkFi blockchain, which will provide these very nice services. And you mentioned your proof of work. Which proof of work algorithm are you using for consensus?
Right. So I don't work on the consensus side, but the dev who does work on that always gets angry when people confuse like consensus and like the other. There's like a few different elements to this, but there's the fork choice rule, which is like, okay, how does the blockchain decide like what, like the longest chain rule, and how does the blockchain decide which
Right.
if there's like multiple blocks created simultaneously, how does blockchain know which is like the canonical chain? There's that, and then there's also like the algorithm, like which, such as you know, in our case, random X. We're using random X, so
Okay.
that's
So
but he always
Monero's.
says, yes, Monero's.
algorithm.
He always says that it's not a consensus algorithm because consensus is to do with the fork choice rule. But anyway, that's like tangential.
That's a good point. That's a valid point. There's more to it than just the algorithm. That totally makes sense.
But for the in
I
terms
see.
of the
So those are
algorithm,
details you're working on.
yeah.
Mhm.
In terms of the algorithm, we're using the random X, and we're also doing it as a merge mine with Monero. Basically because
Oh, really?
yes, as you know, and as your audience probably knows, in the early days of proof of work chains, there's a risk of a 51% attack, where if you have sufficient resources, you can buy up the right amount of nodes that you can actually do a 51% on the chain. And there's a website called, I forget the name, it might be called, I forget the name, but if you look up online, 51% attack cost per coin. There's a website which is actually like tells you how much you need to invest in order to attack various proof of work chains, and it's actually less.
Scary.
Yeah, it's actually less than what you think for some of those chains. So our solution was basically we have the Monero merge mine, which means we're basically we pay Monero miners in Dark token in order for them to lend us some of their hash rate as well.
Right, they just include you in their hash. That seems like a very good approach. It actually sounds a lot like Tari, if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
Fluffy Ponies.
Yes. Yeah.
Project. He's merged mine. Mm-hmm. To do. I'm going from memory. I think it's to like manage assets. There's probably. Are you guys like talking, working together? It seems like there's some parallels there. I think they're developing in Rust.
Yes, there's definitely some parallels. We haven't been communicating much, or at all, actually. I don't even know. It's one of those things where, I suppose Tari probably started around the same time as DarkFi, and we never knew each other was working on that. There's like a few projects like this, and so you just end up developing these kind of parallel ecosystems that are, similar but different. But I suppose oriented towards the same kind of niche. But I don't know from the last one what I remember about Tari, and I'm very like Tari noob, so please correct me. But my understanding is that they're doing some kind of like maybe ring signatures or confidential assets, but they're not using the hardcore ZK that DarkFi is using.
Yeah, they're using Mimblewimble. So that's
Mimblewimble, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, it's a different. As far as I know, Mimblewimble is not anonymous. It's actually it's highly scalable, but it's not anonymous because there are like inputs and outputs. Whereas with DarkFi, there are no inputs and outputs. It is a UTXO model, but like we use a technique which like breaks the link between transactions using ZK.
That sounds great. One final question relating to the smart contracts. I know, I'm not familiar with all the work being done in this area, but I know like Secret that has the data is private, but you can see the smart contract. What aspects of the smart contract are private? Are is more than the data?
So private? When you say you can see the smart contract, do you mean it's readable on chain? Like,
I believe it's my understanding. I may
yeah.
not have that
So
right, but it's my understanding it's
yeah,
readable on chain. The
so
secret.
ours would be similar in that the code would be public, and the smart
Okay.
contracts would be deployed on chain, and you can read the contract code. But like then if you're like depending on the contract, and because you can deploy any contract on DarkFi, but in the contracts we have now, there's basically two layers. One which is the kind of lower level ZK logic, which
Okay.
we use. We have our own ZK VM and custom assembly language to write that, and that's where we do our kind of our anonymity logic, like where we write the constraints in ZK that like enforce and underscore the anonymity of our applications. And then, as well as this kind of ZK layer, we have a normal kind of smart contract layer. So there's smart
Okay.
contracts written in like Rust. They could be written in other languages because we use something called WASM, which is a smart contract runtime. And WASM allows different languages. You can
You
theoretically
basically compile from Rust into that native language. Is that?
yes, into the
Uh
yeah,
huh.
and then
Right.
we have this underlying ZK layer. We have this like higher level smart contract, and then those smart contracts are on chain, and you can call them inside of a transaction.
Okay. Got it.
So that's like the basic. That's the basic idea. Oh, and I'll just mention
Yeah. Nice. Nice architecture.
yeah, so just briefly, like DarkFi is ambivalent to whether like as a technology, it's ambivalent to whether to what happens on a smart contract and whether you're using the ZK or not. You could hypothetically have a fully transparent coin or anything running on DarkFi because it's permissionless and because the DarkFi blockchain doesn't enforce like that your application logic has to be privacy preserving. You could
So
hypothetically
you
run
could just
anything.
have like an ERC20
Yeah,
equivalent coin,
yeah,
right?
you could,
If you wanted
you
to.
could, but we've been building basically our own native contracts, which do have strong privacy preserving properties, because we want to set a precedent for that, and also we want to basically demonstrate to other developers what that would look like and how that works.
Right. Great. So they can see that as a template and use that to make their own, right?
Yeah, exactly. They can learn from that. Yeah,
Tools for them to
tools.
use. Yep. That sounds great.
Dr. Cup just came on. Hey, Dr. Cup. Cap.
Hey Ruben, how's it going?
How are you doing? Is everything okay on your end?
Everything's okay. I literally just finished performing minor surgery on someone's face, which is why I was running a bit late. So yeah, my apologies for coming in a bit late on this one, but no, I caught the tail of that. This sounding pretty interesting so far.
We're just
So I'm
learning
gonna
about DarkFi, and I guess I have, I mean, obviously we have other stuff to talk about, but obviously DarkFi is one of the main topics, and I guess Rosie might say like, oh, Rose might say like, oh, a lot of you guys would know. I don't think you should assume anything. A lot of us are into privacy, but we may not. We may know of DarkFi, but like the intricacies. Like I know you guys, originally started with like some sort of Ouroboros proof of stake, and then I think it was quite a late decision to switch to proof of work, and I think that kind of delayed your launch. So like I guess like one of my questions is like why the decision to do merge mining with Monero? Is it more of like decentralizing? Is it more of a to ally yourself with a community that is all about privacy, which is really good? Or is it all of the above? I guess, if you were involved in that decision, what was your decision? Because you obviously spend a lot of time, doing the Ouroboros consensus mechanism, and no one wants to delay a launch. So I guess it was a pretty big decision to switch to that model, and I just wanted to know what were the considerations behind that, if you could share some of that. Yeah.
Definitely. So yeah, great question. The Ouroboros Crypsinus, for context, is a proof of stake with some privacy preserving properties. So the way that it preserves privacy is that when it does the leader election, so like when the person or the node that's going to produce the next block is elected, that process is private, and the leader of the block producer is private. So it solves the problem that some proof of stake systems have, where the block producer is known on chain in advance, and you can DDoS that producer. I think Solana potentially has this problem. It's a known issue, and so this was attractive to us, and also because we're specializing in ZK, so we wanted to have a go at this like ZK enhanced proof of stake, and so we built a basic implementation, and it was the first major implementation of Ouroboros Crypsinus. There had been other implementations, but they were more like proof of concepts, so it wasn't production-ready software. So we made the first implementation, and there was a kind of a few things that occurred to us all at around the same time. The first thing, which I wrote a Twitter post about recently, was this problem of like how do we get to the point where DarkFi, like there are nodes that have dark tokens that they're able to stake in order for the proof of stake system to start. So it's like we need to have tokens pre-distributed before the blockchain is actually turned on in order for the proof of stake to work. So we looked at different ways that we could do this. We thought about having like some kind of a stakeless stake. So, like you could, for a short period of time, we could have like no requirement to actually have liquidity staked in order just to distribute the token to nodes. We looked at a few different solutions. We also thought about, what if we just do like a protracted pre-distribution on another blockchain? And we basically felt that it was very difficult to do this in a way that was like, firstly, privacy preserving, so that, like, for example, if you were to do a pre-distribution on Ethereum in order to get your nodes equipped with stake, then you'd find yourself in this situation where people have to be using ETH accounts, which are very bad for privacy. So you have your kind of initial user base, essentially tied to this initial set of ETH addresses. So that was concerning. And then also the biggest concern was that in Ouroboros Crypsinus, the probability of any node winning the ability to create to mint the block reward and create a block was quasi-linear with the amount staked. So that meant if you owned 100% of the stake, you would win the election 100% of the time. If you had 90% of the stake, you would win 90% of the time, and so on. And what that meant was essentially the initial balances of the chain were extremely important in this kind of like there was like a path dependency where you were defining like the power structure of your chain with this like initial distribution. So we took that very seriously, And we were like, okay, what's a way? How do we ensure that we safely transmit tokens to like a wide number of nodes or people over like a long enough time period that we don't have this like oligarchical like chain setup. And you know, we started to think about proof of work as a means to do this. And the what's nice about proof of work as a token distribution strategy is that it can be anonymous. So you don't need to collect any ETH addresses or do any kind of like ETH style token sale. You literally they run the node, they run the software, and they win rewards for doing that. So it's like it's actually kind of perfect because you're not giving your value away to some other chain. You know, you're asking people to run the software, and then you're rewarding them with that. So it's like it's kind of the perfect alignment of interests. And so we thought actually there's really strong arguments for the proof of work, and we could use the proof of stake code in the future. But the other thing, and I'm sorry if this is very long-winded, was that the implementation we had written, it worked. We tested it. We had a test net, but it needed to be like carefully audited because there had never been an implementation before. It had never been tested on a real life blockchain. So we were a bit nervous about that. So we felt like something like RandomX could be a good alternative because it's audited. It's been used in production by Monero for years. So we thought, actually it seems like a good compelling alternative. And we have that proof of stake code if at some point we want to return to it, but it does need work, to make sure that it's like properly secure and we're confident in that, nothing could go wrong. So that's the basic. And then in terms of you asked about the merge mining, you pretty much nailed the rationale there. It's just, we wanted to uh, the increased security of involving another chain, and then also Monero specifically because Monero right now it's in tail emission. So the miners that are mining Monero, oftentimes they're doing it somewhat altruistically. They're not even necessarily making huge amounts of money off of that, but they do it because they believe in the project, and that's exactly the kind of people and users that we want to involve. So that's why we went for the Monero merge mine.
Sure. Isn't Ouroboros already used, or at least some type of Ouroboros used in Cardano? I mean, or is it like same name but different systems?
Yeah, it's the same name but different systems. So there is a family of Ouroboros protocols um, made by Cardano and the IOHK research team. Ouroboros Crypsinus is one of those protocols, and it's the one with the privacy preserving characteristics. So it has these like this like special ZK properties where you basically allow the block leader to anonymously mint the block reward without revealing themselves on chain. And so yeah, that's and I believe it was going to be used in production for the Cardano project called Midnight, but as far as I know, they actually stopped using it and used something else. That's the last I stopped following that in the last year or so. So there could be more news on Ouroboros Crypsinus, but the last time I checked about a year ago, it was not being used.
And if you could share, like I understand, from Ahmed that DarkFi had obviously, some investors, I think you raised, I don't know, a bunch of money. Is that like disclosed? Do they get some sort of token allocation, which I guess makes it more concerning or not concerning? Like it was more of a concern if you started out with a proof of stake model and then like, you have your investors starting to kind of like take over the system, right? So I just wanted to know, like, is like, how was like DarkFi funded? I mean, I heard a little bit from Amir, but wasn't like, I didn't dive too deeply into it. But obviously, we don't have to go into the nitty gritty. But I just like, I guess as a whole, what can you share about it? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, DarkFi has investors. We haven't disclosed anything about that. Like our investors since the beginning have like generally been like more interested in like anonymity, and that like they don't want to disclose that they're invested in DarkFi. So like we never did like an announcement that we'd raised money. But we do intend to. Like I mentioned that. This year, like we're gonna start announcing stuff about the token. So coming into this year, we'll start being like more transparent, not about necessarily who invested, because our investors, several of them did like want to invest like without like revealing their names and or entities, but definitely like releasing like the tokenomics and like distribution. Uh, Yes, and that was a concern in terms of proof of stake. Like if you have like a pre-distribution where like you have investors owning a large amount of stake and then they win the block rewards forever, it's like a really bad situation. But the whole tokenomics of that so we have moved to proof of work, but the whole tokenomics around investor distribution is like like still basically work in progress, and there should be news about it in the coming year.
Oh, that's really nice. All right, let's.
I'd
Yeah,
like
go ahead.
to add quickly. I don't. You mentioned worry about it being long-winded. I think it was just great to talk through that. I think it's awesome that you're thinking through the the long-range impact of how you start the distribution. It's like the Big Bang, right? Little things at the beginning make a big difference later, and it's great you're thinking through that. Um, Also, one thing I was thinking, with picking Monero, if you pick a coin to merge mine, it seems like you would want to pick the king of the modality for consensus that they're using. So, like with Monero, it's RandomX, and they use regular CPUs, right? You'd want to hook up with the leader in using CPUs for proof of work. Otherwise, you have somebody that's vulnerable to attack by the miners on the leader. So like you wouldn't want to like you if you'd want to use Bitcoin, you wouldn't want to use some other coin that uses Bitcoin ASICs, for example. In the same way with Monero, you'd want to use Monero. You wouldn't want to use somebody else that relies on CPUs for their proof of work algorithm.
I think you're giving me some alpha, but I haven't like 100% understood what your question is.
Oh, I'm just well. I was thinking you were justifying the use of Monero. I think because they're in the tail emissions, and people are doing it altruistically, but also they're a good choice because they're the leader in the hardware modality that they use for proof of work. They use CPUs. That's the big thing with RandomX, right? Is it runs on a regular plain old CPU. And you definitely want to be like hooked up with the leader in using CPUs for merge mining. That would be the natural choice.
Yeah.
Just a thought
Yeah,
there.
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
No, I was
Ah,
going
okay.
to. No, I was just going to say it's great. It effectively enables a fair launch, and it is great to leverage that kind of CPU mining. Just a general question: why did you guys originally go for a proof of stake protocol over, say, proof of work? What was sort of the intention around that?
I think because at the time when we started working on DarkFi, this was like 2021. We kind of felt as a dev team that proof of stake was the future. It seemed like it was, there is this element of proof of work where uh, it's costly, like it's hardware intensive. requires energy. These are things that proof of work advocates really like. But there's something elegant to how proof of stake virtualizes this. And we liked how kind of lightweight proof of stake is in comparison, that you don't have this strong reliance on hardware. And also just, we felt like this was the next thing. This was like where the kind of Ethereum had put tons of research and development into this. It was like, it seemed to be kind of the next chapter of consensus systems. So I think we were optimistic about proof of stake relative to proof of work. Proof of work felt a bit like blockchain 1.0 or something. And I think there are still people in DarkFi community who hold that opinion. And there's a chance that, maybe after the proof of work has been running for however many years, that there'll be like a community effort to move to proof of stake. But what I found very interesting was that when we announced the decision to change to a proof of work coin, it was like there was like a hugely positive response, which surprised me. I wasn't aware that there was so much public enthusiasm for proof of work, but really it was overwhelmingly positive. And a lot of people will say things, especially nowadays. When I posted recently about this, I had a lot of people say that like Ethereum has become more centralized over time due to the proof of stake. And that the proof of work is better for decentralization. It kind of helps the small guy stay involved in the project. So I think that's the kind of current perception, is like proof of stake is just generally more oligarchical than the proof of work.
I really appreciate that response. It's interesting you said what you said about Ethereum. Just a little info from me. I'm the lead advisor to one of the lead advisors to Basic Swap Dex in the Particle project. The Particle project actually deployed in 2017 as proof of stake. But a little side note about me is actually I got into crypto through Ethereum, and I've continued to follow Ethereum because I still have holdings there. Having gone through the ropes of solo staking, I can tell you right now, being a solo staker in Ethereum is hard. It's still very hard. It's incredibly involved. It took me months to kind of get my head around how not necessarily the why, but just the actual technical aspects of setting up solo staking on Ethereum is not straightforward at all. And the technical requirements and then technical knowledge required is pretty substantial. So I do agree that in Ethereum's solution to proof of stake tends towards forms of centralization, unfortunately. That, from my personal view, maybe others will disagree, but I really appreciate that explanation. And I think it's very hard to launch from proof of stake. I think it's for me, it's one of those things where I started off as I was very much into proof of stake systems. They make a lot of sense to me. But as time's progressed, I tend to veer more towards hybrid proof of work, proof of stake. So thank you for taking the time to answer that. I'm just curious to know, would you guys consider transitioning into a hybrid model or into proof of stake in the future? And actually, the underlying question there is, if so, what sort of process underlines sort of governance around protocol decisions for DarkFi?
Yeah, great question. So one of our first applications that we deployed even on testnet is a fully anonymous DAO. So on DarkFi, you can create these essentially programmable multi-sigs, which are fully anonymous. No one who's a participant in the DAO is known on chain. It's all encrypted. The treasury of the DAO is encrypted, and all of the kind of activity of the DAO, so the proposals, the votes, and etc., any transactions are also like encrypted. So from the perspective of the blockchain, you just see this encrypted noise, just like random encrypted hashes. And the reason why we built that, there's a few reasons. Like, we have some experience in DAOs, but one of the main reasons was to use these DAOs in our own governance. So the idea is, like, once we transition to mainnet, then the decision around these things will no longer be just like in the hands of like a few people, but that there'll be a way for like the stakeholders within the project, the community and inside the project, to have like a direct voice over the direction that the project goes. So like I'm ambivalent really, like in terms of what, like I'm happy as long as DarkFi does proof of work for long enough that there are like a sufficient amount of tokens distributed. I'm happy if it switches to proof of stake or hybrid or like stays a proof of work. I think the hybrid model definitely sounds interesting, but I'm not like I don't have a good technical knowledge on the way those designs work. But you know what's important to us is that like we have mechanisms in place that we can reorient something like a consensus with like enough like genuine like community kind of interaction, because it's been the problem now with like a lot of these blockchains. Like it's very interesting that how the kind of philosophy of governance differs per blockchain. Like in Bitcoin, they have this idea that governance is something that should be ruthlessly minimized, and that the real kind of politics of the chain is like, do you run a node or not? And if you don't like what's going on the software, just don't run a node, or don't buy Bitcoin. It's kind of like it's like an exit type oriented political philosophy, which is like, run it or go away, but there's not much room for voice. There is some like in like on GitHub and etc., but they don't have a culture where they gather input from the community. Aside from, they say like, okay, are the miners going to run this? Like, are the users that like node operators going to run this? Ethereum is different, where they have had like a debate around governance for much longer. Obviously, there was the DAO fork, which was very contentious, and then later on, there was issues with funds getting frozen in smart contracts, and there was similar efforts to kind of like, oh, can we do a hard fork to like save that lost money? So this demanded a lot of like thinking around governance, and they did like set up some like grassroots kind of working groups to discuss like the future of Ethereum, but they were never really able to kind of bridge those grassroots efforts to like tangible kind of on-chain results, like in the form of hard forks or anything. But yeah, I'll just wrap up on this.
Yeah, I'm actually coughing a lot. Yanacha or Cup, maybe you want to yeah, take over a bit. I wanted to give you co-host. I'm not doing so hot.
Oh yeah, sure. Dr. Cap and I can continue. So let's see. And Rosie, you're still there. It cut off a little bit for a moment.
Yeah, sorry, I was interrupted. Yeah, I'm still here. Could you guys hear me? Okay, I've got some feedback that I'm a bit quiet.
Oh no, I can hear you perfectly fine.
I'm hearing you fine.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think I was just saying, there's Bitcoin, there's ETH. We're trying a different approach where we have these on-chain organizations. It's not without challenges. Like DarkFi DAOs, the way that they've been built, it's a very basic version of a DAO. So it's fully kind of token weighted governance, which means you have a token, and using that token you can vote. So if you have more tokens, you can basically sway the vote. So that's a little bit of an issue. So like, you know, the Ethereum has solutions. They use something called quadratic voting, which is like ways that they get around this, but it all requires like a hard concept of identity, on-chain identity, which DarkFi is trying to do this anonymously. But there are kind of ways that we can do this using financial instruments and so on, but we're not deep into that yet. But generally, I would just say like we do have these DAOs, which we intend to use for like on-chain governance, so that the decisions around like contentious things like what is the future consensus mechanism of DarkFi, it isn't just like in the hands of the core dev team, but like actually in the hands of the community as well.
If the proposals are encrypted, how do people like read them and know how to vote? How do the voters access the unencrypted version?
So the proposals can be like you can imagine. Like on DarkFi, we have this. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. We have this this chat app that is like the kind of center product. So you could imagine that your DAO, you could be sharing the like plain text of the proposal in the chat, or you could have it on a forum, and you could have your discussion. But on the chat, you would be able to have like fully anonymous discussions on this proposal. But when I say the proposal is encrypted, I mean like the on-chain representation of the proposal is encrypted.
So it's almost like it's encrypted on chain, and then you can talk to people about it unencrypted, and they can verify that what you're talking about is actually is actually the unencrypted version of what they're voting on.
Yes.
So it separates like the proposal representation on the blockchain from the actual disclosure. You could disclose it to a few big voters or something like that.
Yes.
You don't have to disclose it to everybody.
Yes. So
very interesting.
So when we talk about proposals, like I mentioned, the DarkFi DAO right now that we've built is very primitive. So it's like the most kind of, we have a series of upgrades we want to make, but it's the most basic kind of DAO. But when we talk about proposals, we actually mean something very specific, which is like your proposal, usually in our case, in the current implementation, it says something like send X amount of some token to an address that's like specified in the proposal. And like so obviously proposals can be more complex than this, and they don't always need to be sending money. But the thing that we got working on DarkFi is that you can so someone in the DAO, they need to have a certain amount of tokens, but they can list this proposal which says, I think we should send such and such amount of money to such and such an address. And then people can anonymously vote on that. And then if it passes like a threshold that's set by the DAO, like say you might want like, 80% of tokens said yes, then if anyone can call there's like a set of people who can call a function in the DAO called exec, and that will execute the transaction. Yeah, so that's,
and it can only happen if it passes. So
yes.
So it has to pass, and one of this set of individuals has to trigger it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you'd trigger an Ethereum smart contract.
Yes,
I see.
Exactly.
Well, who is that set of individuals, and
that's
why not open
it
to everyone?
You can open it up.
So that's in the smart. Is that built into the smart contract, or is it like a macro?
That's more like a permissions
quality
thing.
Okay.
So you could, if you want to have like, the thing is, it's like this to have this ability to execute a transaction. You essentially need to have the DAO private key, and the DAO private key, which allows you to spend. It doesn't mean that you can always spend, because you can only spend if this condition is met, like if people have voted and all this this process has happened. So you can't just normally just spend. You can only if it's approved by the DAO. But if you have the private key, you can read the balance of the DAO. So that's why it's kind of like a permissions question, because you might, in your DAO, you might want only a small number of people to be able to know the balance of the treasury. You might want everyone to know the balance of the treasury, or like it could just be one person, etc. It's kind of up to like the DAO and the
Up to
operational security
the designers
of the DAO.
of the, yeah, that makes sense, right? Open it up, and then the designer can do it how they feel is best.
Yes.
Yeah, very nice.
Just one question. It may have been asked before I got here. How do you envisage and hope the culture of DarkFi will be kind of moving forward?
Culture.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a cool question. I think I mentioned a few times that we're different to a normal L1 project because we're not just simply building the base infrastructure, we're also offering a core product. And the reasoning there is that we're moving away from a kind of thinking around technology where if you build the tools, then the users will come. And we've kind of grown, we've turned into like a new way of thinking about technology, which is much more to do with community and like culture, actually. So I think your question is very much on point. And so the culture of DarkFi is like very much this kind of like question of like who is using DarkFi, who's like the core user base. And right now we have this chat app, which I've mentioned a few times, but I haven't really explained. So maybe like I should talk about that in
yes, please.
after. But yeah, but so this application which allows for like fully anonymous, encrypted, peer-to-peer, censorship resistant communication. It's right now it's like it's quite hard to use. So it's basically you have to install Rust, you have to compile it locally to run a node. There's a lot of like filtering that happens in terms of our initial community, but the community we have on the Dark IRC chat now is like a very very vibrant, hardcore, strongly aligned, like militant core community, which like we love, but we want to obviously grow that, and the goal for growing that, or like the path to growing that, is to lower the barrier to entry, so that the chat becomes basically plug and play. We did build a basic version of that, which is just an APK that you can run on Android. It's like just like in a single click you have access to the chat, but it's very basic. So we still need to develop that further. But we hope to so we're putting out these tools, we're making them easier and easier to use. We're not just thinking about providing tools for people, but also like providing a network of people and like creating a network of people. And we're also different to other projects in that we have a strong emphasis on philosophy and narrative and storytelling, which is a very interesting way to kind of like basically encode this initial community with a set of values and like a kind of common vision for the future of where this is going, or like why we're building what we're building. So people who've seen my talks, they might have heard me refer to what we call the dark forest, which is what our word for the internet basically rewilded with cryptography and these like free speech zones that are opening up online. and the kind of multiplicities and like richness of culture and politics and speech that that anonymity allows. So we really like, that's what we're invested in. That's our core thesis, and we want to kind of grow that vision through like simultaneously this like product thing, but also ourselves communicating our values. So we want to start, we're putting out much more media, trying to excite people around this vision of like the name DarkFi, like this idea of like going dark. So like expanding the space of like of free speech and censorship resistant activity, where people can talk without feeling like they're being monitored. What we've seen is that online, these kind of spaces which allow for like a purely anonymous space where people don't feel like that there's like a major kind of cost if they express an opinion that's like could be seen as like like weird or like socially unacceptable. When you like lower the cost to that and just create a space that's like very open and free and where people can debate without feeling like they're going to be ostracized for their opinions, it's actually it's conducive to a very strong culture. And we see that online, where if you have if you're on social media, the more kind of oriented that social media is around identities, and like real name identities especially, the more the social media becomes basically people performing the role that identity is kind of assigning to them. So it's like Twitter nowadays is like, it is a more and more a free speech platform, but it's people performing an identity that they've kind of like set up, like or kind of brand that they've set up for that like that particular social media instance. Whereas if you look at somewhere like 4chan, it's much more anonymous. People, but it's also much more generative and creative. So a lot of the culture that we see on Twitter has actually been adopted from 4chan. It's kind of downstream from 4chan. So we think that like true kind of creative and culture and true creative culture is basically like a latent space that is like waiting to be activated and to grow, like using encryption and what we call these like dark forest techniques.
No, I was just going to say, I think we have a lot in common, Rose, in terms of outlook and our cultural views. One thing I just wanted to say is interesting what you said about Twitter, because it's a public platform. You have these identities, and often people can become trapped by their own identities. And obviously, freedom of speech, the ability to express oneself truly freely, to think and express laterally and in unexpected ways. The ultimate safeguard of that, I agree with you fully, is privacy and anonymity. So I think we have a common ground there. Going a little bit further back into what you said, something I strongly agree with is something I foresee is the evolution of something called the privacy liquidity ecosystem. So I think, I look at public blockchains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and I see inevitable CBDCs, and I see them operating on public blockchains with transaction scanning, and that will become a liquidity ecosystem, a money system, a flow of commerce and marketing, but it will be traceable and censorable, and the people operating on it will either be censored or will self-censor. And I think that's problematic, because you reduce the ability to think, or you reduce the ability to express, which in turn can impact the ability to think. If you reduce the novelty of thought, you reduce the adaptability of thought, then you reduce the adaptability of action, which in turn reduces the adaptability of information that flows and is exchanged. And we as a species need adaptability in order to be able to survive against unexpected challenges and setbacks. To that end, I do see the privacy liquidity ecosystem evolving to support private e-commerce, and I foresee a culture around that is very much more privacy centric and focused on people being able to express themselves freely, freed of the restraint of an identifiable identity. So I do see a lot of common ground here. The reason I asked about culture is because I think I just think it's a really big and important thing as we move forward, as we decide who and what we want to become. And I'm not here to say who and what we want to become collectively. I look at that on that's a person to person basis. It's very much up to the individual, but I think we need to build and preserve those spaces, because we increasingly live in a society where, whilst we're much more networked, we are much more surveilled. So I think there's a lot I agree with you a lot here. It follows from my previous question and follows from what you've said. What about, I think I already know the answer from this, but how do you sort of feel about, collaboration of DarkFi with other projects within the privacy ecosystem? What are you, how do you hope things will sort of follow and flow from there?
Well, I think what you spoke about sounds really exciting and, definitely in line with our vision. And, in terms of collaboration, like we're open to all sorts of collaborations, like wherever possible. I think, the best strategy is to like maximize all possible kind of liquidity inflows. At the same time, obviously we have limited resources and focus and time, so we need to be kind of somewhat selective and focused in the kind of like what is the process we take in terms of these collaborations and so on. But generally speaking, I think that when it comes to privacy technology, there's safety in numbers, and we should, like, as much as possible, like especially when there's shared values, which there usually is, which is one of the cool things about privacy in crypto in general. I think it generally overlaps with more kind of like political motivation, which I think is amazing. One of the attractive things about privacy in crypto in general. Yeah, so I think we're as much as possible we can like pool resources, like share liquidity flows, build networks, economic financial networks, and expand our communities and our reach. I think that sounds all really positive. And I think we're like I'm DarkFi is an L1. We built it that way because we don't want to. We didn't want to get into this L2 type architecture at the time, because it wasn't clear. To be honest, it still isn't clear that L2s are going to be the future of blockchain scaling and blockchain interoperability. There's a lot of interesting work being done in inter-blockchain communication, and bridges. They're like, a lot of them are not great, but there is progress being made in kind of trust minimization. So I'm still very optimistic on the idea of like a multipolar, multi-chain future, and building in that direction. Even if I'm wrong, and actually the future is more like monopolized and it's just like a few blockchains. I hope it's not the case, or one single blockchain. But even if I'm wrong, I see this then as a kind of evolutionary process where basically we're all of us like fielding out this new technology. We're kind of like seeding it, and then that technology will kind of adapt and evolve and seek out little market niches, and some of it will thrive and like spawn offspring and create like huge technological dynasties. And other things will die off in time, and that's fine as well. So yeah, that's kind of my position on that.
Yeah, I think you're right. With bridges and atomic swaps and things, we're all part of the same organism, aren't we?
Mm.
It's a
I
good
just
way to
also
look
wanted
at it.
I just wanted to add, it's interesting what you said about not building as an L2. I wanted to just comment and say, if you build as an L2, it goes back again to how that affects your culture and your identity. That's inevitably going to be, I think that's inevitably then going to be influenced by the culture of the L1, because it's essentially a dependency. So I think it's
That's
an
a good
interesting,
point.
and that's something I felt. So I think your decision to launch as an L1 is sensible. As you've said, interoperability, the quality of interoperability can vary, but that's something that can be improved, and that's something that is being improved actively. I can attest to the work of basic swap decks in terms of that. We've got plenty of evidence there, and you guys know of that. But there are lots of other areas where interoperability is improving. But I think it's this idea again that I want to go back to of cultural fragmentation. Over the 2 years that we've been running, I think we've interviewed, or we've had probably a good 20 different projects on, I feel. And it goes that idea of the ecosystem is currently fragmented because you've got all these different projects and they're doing all this great work and they're exploring all these niches, and they've all got their own individual adaptations, styles, ethoses, philosophies, cultures, even whilst having that kind of core common ethos of privacy. But that fragmentation, that I still see as, how do we, that to me is still a problem. How do we kind of bring everyone together in a way that's kind of interoperable in a way that's interoperable, but doesn't impact necessarily on their culture, on the way they do things. So I think, that just kind of talking here off what you said, I think that's a really important thing to me looking forward, how we bring everyone to almost together, everyone together under an alliance effectively, because that way, that way we are much stronger. So yeah, I'll leave it from my end.
Right. And let's see, Ruben may be coughing, so I will interject here and say we're near the end of the hour. Are there any questions? Let's see. Is there any questions for Rosie or for anyone else? Let's see if.
I do have a question for Rose.
Yes.
So the upcoming, what you guys wish to release or hope to release in 25 is the token. And you guys, if I understand this correctly, there's a DAO, there's the chat platform, there's the token, and there's other elements in this suite of this sort of ecosystem. And we're not expecting, like, obviously some of that is going to come after the coin. Am I understanding this correctly?
So this is a good, thank you for the question. And this is a good way for me to sneak in a explanation of what our chat is, because I mentioned it a lot, but I didn't really go into it. So, we have this anonymous chat. It's a highly anonymous chat, the most anonymous on the market. The reason I say that is because you can, on this chat, and right now it's a fully peer-to-peer chat. So it works right now by you run a node locally on your computer, which is also why there's a high barrier to entry, because you have to compile, you have to install Rust, you have to compile, you run this daemon. And right now, we built it in such a way that it works with the IRC protocol. So that means that we can actually run this peer-to-peer daemon using any IRC front end. So we haven't been building a front end until recently. We were just using the IRC front ends. So it's very comfortable, but it allows for, basically you can, and just to say about IRC, it kind of corrects the legacy of IRC, because IRC is like a beautiful protocol, but that it's centralized, so you're always deploying it on a server, and it's used by a lot of software projects. But they, there's also issues with the fact that it's centralized, and there is censorship issues and so on. So we've corrected that by creating a like version of the IRC protocol, which is fully peer-to-peer and also has this anonymity features, which I'm about to explain. So on the chat, you can change your nick as many times as you want, and it's not visible. Like so I put my name as Rose, and then I can change my name to Frank, and no one knows that the person who is Rose is now Frank, and those identities are like fully unlinkable. Similarly, if I write messages, the messages are unlinkable. So it's deniable that, like, the speech is essentially deniable because you can't say like that the person called Frank who wrote this message at 12 was the same person called Frank who wrote this other message at 1 p.m. So there's like a high degree of deniability when it comes to the speech. Then we also have encrypted direct messages. We all have encrypted channels, private channels. We also have public channels as well. So, for example, we do our dev meeting is on our dev channel is public, so it's fully transparent. But we have private channels as well, and then it's also we've made it so it's very easy to run it over Tor, and eventually in the future we'll have support for NIM as well. So it's been built with this kind of metadata anonymities in mind. So the idea is like you can have like a fully anonymous chat. And basically, so I mentioned we haven't been thinking about UI until now. So recently we've started to build a product, which is the first version of the product is a chat. So it's this peer-to-peer chat that I just explained. It's a front end for that. But the vision is like in the future that using this product, this front end, you'll also be able to interact with these other kind of core DarkFi offerings. So you'll be able to vote in a DAO, you'll be able to send money, you'll be able to, we have a peer-to-peer task management system. And as we continue to release these smart contracts, you could interact with them through this front end. And you know we're designing this in a way where we're trying to break out of the paradigm of front ends and UIs that have become dominant in the kind of Web 2 world. So we're trying to chart a new path and make something like really cool that's like more in line with like what we wanted from the future back in the 90s. Like if you watch like the old sci-fi films, like how did they see the future? So these kinds of like, you know, amazing like graphical like hacker UIs, which are like highly modular and elegant. That's what we want to build towards, instead of this like you know, these interfaces which are essentially stupefying users and making them, you know, into like NPC robots, clicking buttons. So we're trying to move away from that. We're trying to create activated users through the creation of this like extremely cool UI interface. So that's a vision. In terms of you asked about like what comes out when. We're still defining like the exact sequence of events, to be like perfectly honest. So I don't have a clear answer for you yet. But the idea is like, in my hope, 2025 we'll start seeing like you know some like definitely like more concrete DarkFi releases. You know, we're very, very close now to releasing a testnet of the proof of work that we've been building. So we're extremely close. That's going to come soon. The goal is, and again, like please don't quote me on this because this is all very work in progress and it's not finalized. But the goal is we'll have some kind of like a public testnet for sure, 2025. You know, maybe rolling out some kind of incentivized testnet, but that's not confirmed. That's just an idea right now. And you know, we'll definitely be coming out with articles explaining the tokenomics. And if we're organized, we'll also be like you know, maybe putting out some token, but none of that is confirmed. It's all work in progress right now.
Awesome.
Okay, let's see. We are near the end of the hour. Maybe we have time for one more question. One more, if there is one. Let's see. Maybe Dr. Cap, do you see any requests?
I do not. We have lots of content listeners, though, which is nice.
Yes. Okay, well, maybe we should, it's at the end of the hour. Rose, it's been a wonderful discussion, it's insightful, and thank you for coming on.
I just want to
Thanks so
say
much for having me.
no, it's a really cool vision you've just outlined, and I'm really looking forward to see what you guys bring out in well, you've described it, but I'm really hoping you guys push ahead and, get those deliveries through, because it's what you're describing sounds really exciting.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
The energy.
Let's do it.
Thank you.
The energy of DarkFi right now is very, it's electrifying in the privacy space, I think.
Thank you so
Yes,
much.
it is. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks, guys.